welcome back. It's John the photographer with PhotoWorks talking about the ABC photo guide. So I don't know how far along you've gotten into some of the other videos, but I am doing a whole series where I'm going to be reviewing the whole book from now until Thursday, or probably even before that, just to talk about the various little chapters that I have inside the book. So this particular video is dedicated to D, which is drag the shutter. And for those of you that don't know what drag the shutter is, I'll get into that in a moment. But like I mentioned in my last video, there's a whole bunch of little cute quotes in here that I've inserted to give you guys, the readers, a real essence of what photography is. And this quote is by Bernice Abbott. It's a famous photographer. And here's a quote: "Photography can only represent the present. Once photographed, the subject becomes part of the past." And I've always said, you know, photography is an art. It's one of those things that you continually work on, you continually improve, and you are always working to make yourself better. And dragging the shutter is one of the ways in which you make your photography better, and it's one of the ways in which you make yourself stand out from everybody else. Actually, in the book, I have some of the images that I've taken and inserted from, you know, my time photographing, and this particular one is from a wedding. I'm a wedding photographer, portrait photographer here in Toronto, but I've also photographed everywhere around the world, in other places around the world, Caribbean being one of my favorite. And dragging the shutter is really just slowing down your shutter so you bring in a little bit more ambient light without flash. I hate flash. Sorry, don't get me wrong. I like flash, and I think flash has a purpose and a place. And as long as you're using it at the right time with in the right scenario, then you're going to get the photograph you want. But my preference, I don't want to say I hate flash, but my preference is always to photograph with ambient light. And you do that by bringing down your shutter, so you bring more light into your camera where you're allowed to do that. And in this particular image, it's a couple dancing. They're doing their first dance for their wedding. And I slowed down my shutter to 1/40th or 1/30th of a second, and I held it really still. And whenever I can, I try to use a tripod, because if you're going to use a slow shutter, you're going to want to anchor your camera onto something really stable. So I hunkered down 1/40th of a second, and what was really neat is there was people dancing around them. And you can actually see in the photo that there's a slight blur on the people moving around them, because I'm dragging the shutter, so I'm letting the shutter go a little bit slower than what's actually happening in the scene. But the people in the middle, they were standing still, they were dancing, they were holding on to one another, and they stayed perfectly positioned, so I was allowed to capture them perfectly frozen in the frame while people are dancing around them. And that's what makes your photography really stand out and your photography really different from everybody else's, because you know how to do stuff like that. So drag the shutter is one of those tricks that really allow you to stand out from your competition, from your friends. And people, when they look at your photographs, they're going to say, wow, that is amazing. And you do it because you do it purposely and you know why you're doing it. It's one thing, you know, actually I talk about this, it's not one of those 1 in 1,000 things. Once you know the little tips and the little tricks in making those images happen, those images really stand out, that's when magic starts to happen, and that's when you start to get noticed. So there you go. Chapter D is drag the shutter, just a little tip in there. If you want the actual technical how-to, just look up YouTube, you'll see a whole bunch. I didn't want to get into all of that, but there are some basic settings that I use for dragging the shutter. Alright everybody, that's it. That is D for Drag the Shutter from the ABC Photo Guide. If you are interested in learning more about the book, it's available on Amazon. Just look at the links below and you'll see what I mean. So there you go. Alright, hopefully you find that insightful. I'll talk to everybody later.